Good afternoon, everyone. How you going? Everyone had a good lunch? Awesome, sweet. I hope you're having a great day at convention so far. So there's a question for you. Have you ever considered doing something different with your medical degree? Dr. Peyton is an emergency physician and an entrepreneur. He's had an exciting career to date, where he's spent the last 15 years combining his passion for medicine and also the business world. In today's session, he will answer questions such as, where else can my degree take me? Why would you consider an alternative career? And what are the risks and benefits involved? Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Peyton.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks very much. So thanks all for coming. I'm sorry about the change of rooms, and I'm hoping that I can figure out how to work this little thing, so if I make any mistakes, I apologize in advance. Today I wanted to talk to you about why risk failure. Because I've been sitting where you were as a medical student a long time ago in Glasgow, and through medical school and then whenever I became a doctor, I've always had this interest in creating businesses. Always felt the whole way through that there was something missing for me in medicine, and with the traditional paths that we have with surgery and emergency and being physician training or general practice, there was always something missing, and I felt the whole way along that I needed to explore it. The problem that I had was that I had nobody to ask, and I had no idea what to do, and so I sort of bumbled my way through this. And so what I thought, after 15 years of doing this, I'd come and have a chat with you about the options available and some of the questions I ask myself whenever I start a new venture or whenever I choose a different path in my career. So the talk is why risk failure? Because it's the question that I ask myself every single time I sit down and I think, what's the next business I'm going to be part of? What am I going to do? Is it going to be as an entrepreneur? Am I going to invest in something? Or is it something that I'm going to be an advisor on a board for? And I have to make sure that it fits in with my beliefs and what drives me forward. And I suppose at the end of this, I want you to be able to ask the same question to yourself and think, as you qualify, is medicine really, traditional forms of medicine really the right thing for you? Or do you want to be doing something else? And so I suppose the first question is, who am I? And why am I bothered talking to you? As I said to you before, I've spent 5 years in Glasgow Medical School, and while I was at medical school, I was really interested in building businesses. And at the time, it was a really exciting time in the UK because the banks were giving money away, especially to medical students, because they said, you're going to have a good job, so here's 110% mortgage to buy whatever you want. It was fantastic. And whoever thought it would go horribly wrong for everybody in the UK? And so we borrowed lots of money, and we bought flats and we renovated them, and it ended up that a lot of the people that I worked with used to live in our accommodation, and we wanted to do it to a very high standard because we wanted to look after the people that I went to uni with. The challenge with that is I got to the end of my medical school, and I thought, well, now's the time, right? You have to stop all those silly things that you were doing before and settle down and really, really filter into a career in medicine, because everybody I talked to, all my consultants said, you can't do anything else. If you're a doctor, and that's all you can do. And so I gave up any of my business interests at that stage, and I started to look at medicine. I worked hard. I decided that surgery was what I wanted to do initially, so I did my surgical exams by the time I'd finished internship. I stayed late every night to learn how to operate. I did every course known to man in the first year, and so I was setting myself up to apply for jobs because the NHS wasn't a very nice place for applicants for jobs. And I think when I was applying for orthopaedic surgery, there was 180 applicants for 3 or 4 jobs in Scotland. And so as I progressed through this, and as I did more and more medicine, there was still something missing the whole way along. And so after 15 years of being an entrepreneur and building about 6 businesses through my medical career, both here and in the UK, prior to that, I did my medical training the whole way through as well. Now, that meant that I was spending, when I was in trauma at Royal Perth, 100 hours a week sitting in the hospital and still trying to do all these things on the side. And so I've learned a lot on the way through. And so the question is, why risk failure? Because in medicine, risks and failure are not something that we like to discuss and talk about. We like to mitigate risk, and nobody likes talking about their failures, right? Because once you qualify, once you've got a DR in front of your name, it carries with it a certain expectation, both from the public and from the people around you and your patients. So I like to think about it separately. I want to talk today about developing your why we do what we do. I want to look at the risks and how to mitigate some of those risks. And I want to look at how we look at failure both personally but also in the profession that you're getting yourself into. So when we talk about why, my version of why is something slightly different, I suppose, than just the question. Really interesting TED Talk, and a guy called Simon Sinek has a great book, and it's called Start With Why. And what he says is, everyone has a why. Your why is the purpose, cause, or belief that inspires you. It's that little voice inside you that says, this works for me, or it doesn't work at all. And so it's the piece as you're moving through medical school and as you're moving through your medical career, that every time you're sitting in something going, this doesn't really work for me, or it does, and this is exactly where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be there. The challenge is, what you want to do is find people who share your same beliefs, your same why, because those people will help you get to where you want to go. The challenge is that if you're in an industry or in a part of the profession that doesn't share your beliefs and your culture, then you're going to find it a very depressing place. And because of that, then we see people now that qualify for medical school and they're unfulfilled, and in the first years as interns and residents we get very down, we get depressed, and in the worst case scenarios people end up killing themselves because the culture is such that it doesn't fit in with what they believe that they were supposed to be, or it's so stressful because they're not doing what they set out to do in life. And so going right back to where I developed my why from, this is Northern Ireland. So I grew up with 25 years of the Troubles. The Troubles were like a really big argument that lasted for far too long. And so everybody had a story. There's only 1.5 million people in Northern Ireland. And the challenge with that is any time there's a bombing or a shooting, you know somebody. And not only you know somebody, but it has an effect on your friends and your family and your relatives. And so this was a common scene. This is taken from the middle of Belfast. And it's just like being in the middle of Perth, or just being like at this convention centre now. And you're walking uptown with your family, and all of a sudden there was a car bomb that went off, and people were hurt and maimed and killed. And I was very lucky growing up. My dad was a trauma surgeon, and my mum was a social worker. And their belief was that everybody was entitled to be looked after. And so as a trauma surgeon in a very small area where there weren't many surgeons full stop, his belief was that he would always put himself last in front of his patients. So it meant that every day if there was a bomb, he would disappear for 7 days, and he would operate solidly until such times as there was nothing more to do and there was no one else he could help. And so when I was growing up, that seemed very noble to me. That seemed great. You could give up your whole life for somebody else. The challenge in medicine is that doesn't really work for us. Because when you give up absolutely everything for other people, you start to get very down and resentful. And so the challenge that I found in that environment whenever I qualified, because I still had that belief, is that you do as much as possible for other people, then it doesn't leave much life for yourself at the end of it all. And so the challenge with that is then you need to find that balance, but you need to find what inspires you, and you need to find the right people around you to inspire you and move you forward. And so the question is, from here on in, one of the first things I would do is figure out what it is that you really want in life and what that balance looks like. It may be that you want to help absolutely everybody on the planet, and that's very noble. It may be that you want to be the best husband, best father, the best wife. Whatever that looks like, getting that right in your head now, so that whenever you're choosing your jobs and your career going forward is incredibly important. And it also helps you if you're sitting in medicine and you've done a couple of years and you go, none of this works for me, because that why will drive you to do more and do other things. So the next part that we'll talk about is risk, and there's always a way to mitigate risk. Now, I love this episode of South Park. I don't know how many people saw it when Cartman became ginger, and I've lived with that affliction my entire life. And the problem with it is, and these lights are pretty hot, so I'm just wondering if I'll leave here with a melanoma, but anyway, the challenge with that is that we always have to mitigate risk. Now, I'm not telling everybody that they have to go out tomorrow and take massive risk to get the life that they want, but it's all about what risk you're willing to take to get you where you want to go. And back to Northern Ireland, when we were growing up, the risk was very real for us, because what happened was whenever you were operating for your belief system was that you did whatever you had to do for any of your patients, and that meant that you treated everybody that walked in the door. So whether or not it was a police officer, an army officer, or a terrorist, you treated them all the same, you put them back together, and it was up to somebody else to decide if they were guilty of a crime. The problem with that is we got funeral wreaths delivered to our door on a regular basis. And the reason we got funeral wreaths delivered to the door was because you fixed somebody that somebody else didn't like you doing. And the IRA was always a bit poetic, and they like to make sure that terrorism is all about fear, right? So with terrorism, as long as you can keep people scared to do their job or keep people scared to go about their normal life, you've won. And so what they used to do is they deliver this funeral wreath, and for the next 6 months, you'd have to check your car every day, or you'd just be a bit more careful when you went outside. Now, we've got some things to give away, because I always like a bit of participation. And this is a car, and this is part of the challenge that we grew up with. And can anybody notice anything wrong with that car in the picture? Anybody at all? We've got a little prize pack for you to say thank you very much for putting your hand up. The great thing is it doesn't have to be right, you just have to have a go. It's old. Good. We're getting there. Anybody notice anything about the wheels? They're slightly outwards. Good. Now, how many wheels do you see? 5. Excellent. So there's supposed to be 5 wheels. Now, so that 5th wheel is that. And that is a block of C4 in a biscuit tin and a magnet. And so what they used to do is they used to come up and they used to put that underneath your car. And so every morning we would check underneath the car to make sure that nobody had done this overnight. Because the risk for people like my dad in that environment was that you took the risk, but the risk was with your life. The great thing is that we're in Australia, and we don't have to worry about making decisions that that are as serious as you might not wake up the next day. But it's not to say that your decisions aren't without risk. And it's not to say that leaving traditional medicine and leaving a traditional version of medicine isn't going to cause you some heartache and risk, especially because there isn't much in the way of support. So if you have a business idea or a startup idea, or you want to be the CEO of a company, there isn't a whole lot of guidance there to help you get there. So it all comes down to failure. I suppose that's another question. Does anybody know what that guy did? It's probably what they tell us most of the time, eh? So this is what happens when 16 centimeters aren't enough. And so we get this on a regular basis. This image I took off the internet, but I have an iPhone full of interesting pictures of things people put in their bums. And you take the risk. Sometimes it doesn't work out. And I suppose you could technically call that a failure, right? The interesting thing about failure is that everybody has them, but in medicine we don't like to talk about them, because once, as I said to you before, once you say you're a doctor, your colleagues look at you different, but your patients look at you different. And it's a very interesting thing, because all of a sudden they put you on a pedestal, and you don't want to ever be seen as not capable or moving too far outside the box, because we're all moving on this similar path. So if we step outside and we fail, everybody's going to know about it, and everybody's going to talk about you, right? So I thought I would tell you about some of my epic failures, because I've had a few. And the first one was trying to do drive-through coffee in Ireland once I saw it over here. So this was I thought it was a good idea, right? We built something called the same as MuzzBuzz, and we built a unit, and we spent a lot of money on it. And the challenge was we couldn't get a site for it, and in the end we had to put it beside in a not so nice area of Glasgow. And the problem was as well, it's very green. And the problem in Glasgow is if something's very green in an area where it should be very blue because of religion and because of Rangers and Celtic, then people don't buy your stuff, and they try to stay away from it. So we made an epic fail from that, but the problem was that the unit was already set down, and it got vandalized, and people tried to burn it down because it's Glasgow and that's what they do. And so it all went horribly wrong. We wasted a lot of money, and it didn't go anywhere, because that's a failure. I failed in medicine as well. In my first year, when I was interested in building businesses, I did my first year degree, and it turns out that if you don't turn up to university and you don't study, then you probably don't pass. So I learned that the hard way, and it was a good lesson, because it made sure that the next time I wasn't going to make that same mistake again. But was it embarrassing? Certainly. Did my ego take a massive hit? Yes, because when you're in medical school, you think, right, we're in, right? And for the majority of people, you're going to get out the other side and you're going to be called doctor. And there's a big gap. There's a big line one way or the other, so that you can really, for some of you, you're intelligent, you'll coast by and get out the other side, and the real work starts when you qualify. And so failures are everywhere. It happens all the time. And then you would think I'd learned, right? You think I learned in medical school that I've got another 4 years, I don't need to rock the boat. But the problem was that I was quite outspoken, and my belief was that if you were a doctor, you had to be doing the right thing for other people. So then I did general practice as a month-long elective, and the guy that was teaching me was absolutely terrible. And I could have just sat there and said nothing, but instead I told him that he was absolutely terrible. And the challenge with telling people that they're terrible when they sign you off at the end of the block means that they don't sign you off at the end of the block and you have to do it again in the summer. So I learned the hard way again. And I suppose I've learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. The most recent was at the ball. Went to the Boobalicious ball at the weekend, had a few drinks, and did some wonderful dancing, and managed to rip my trousers from front to back, so that by the end it looked like I was wearing a pair of assless chaps, which I suppose at the adult shop ball was probably what some people were wearing, but it was not what my intention was from the start. So failures happen all the time, and it's better if we embrace them and learn from them, instead of trying. In medicine, what you'll find is once you get out, it's very hard to admit your failures. It's very hard to admit them to patients. And admitting that you didn't do something 100% right doesn't mean that anyone's going to sue you, which is the big fear that we all have, right? And I'm sure now everybody has a story about a doctor when you're doing something and somebody told you a story about that time somebody got sued. It's probably all bollocks. Or ask what actually happened at the end of it all, because not everybody gets sued every second of the day. But because of that, because of our culture, it makes us think about, what's the worst case scenario, what's the worst that can happen. So the question is, why risk failure? And the challenge that you have in medicine is that we have a culture. That culture basically is quite restrictive. We don't like risk, and we mitigate risk. And the good thing is good for our patients, because anytime something happens, we have another process, another procedure, another protocol. And that's fantastic because it protects patients, but it makes us all think in a very set linear path. And when we're trying to grow and be a surgeon or be an emergency doctor, you follow this very set path. And so if you come straight out of medical school, straight into university, and from university you go straight to being a doctor, and you're always pushed along this path because that's what we tell you should do, right? You should have your career set up now so that you can push forward. The challenge with doing that is that I think we restrict the way we think, and because of our culture, then we stop to have a go at things and try and decide whether or not we can fail and move on. So we're trying to make it easier for you, and so for the first time, I'm working with a college over in Canberra, with the sole goal of connecting people who don't want to, who are halfway through their medical degree and are worried about whether or not they actually want to be a doctor at the end of it, whether or not you want to be clinical at the end of it. What we're trying to do is give you options and connect you with people who are in different roles, have had a medical degree, and then stepped outside it. So CEOs of companies, medical directors, board members, entrepreneurs and founders. There's a big difference between a founder and entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is somebody who builds a business and risks things to get it off the ground. A founder is somebody who has an idea and then hands it off to somebody else. And so what we want to do is we want to connect you with all of these people so that they can share their stories and basically tell you how it works and hopefully give you some support. But more than anything else, we want you to stand, when you get out the other side and you get a fellowship, we want you to stand shoulder to shoulder with the rest of your colleagues. Because if you can get a fellowship in surgery and a fellowship in emergency medicine, why can't you get a fellowship for being a CEO of a company? Or why can't you get a fellowship for being an entrepreneur? Because nothing else fitted in with what you wanted to do. And so we want to offer something a little bit more. So we want to offer that educational process, and we wanted to offer you a fellowship. So we're actively working on that at the moment, and the college is young, but hopefully we can make a bit of a dent as we move forward, and we can make things a bit easier for you as we do. So what else are we doing to try and make things easier for you? Well, I built iMeducate, and it's free for everybody here. It's to help you with your exams, and there's lots of questions on it, and quite a large number of students already use it. And so what we looked at is building online platforms, and so being part of the startup community. The interesting thing about the startup community is that as medics, we don't really embrace it, but it's out there now, and it's a great way of taking your ideas and putting it with technology and trying to see what you can create. The funny thing is that we use technology all the time now, and we use technology in medicine, but a lot of the platforms that we use in medicine are old, archaic. There's no apps for anything. We don't use mobile devices, and the problem is that we're a bit slow to change. And so the question in all of it is, how do we we have a fellowship in surgery, but we don't have a fellowship in technology because it's something that we all use on a regular basis to treat our patients. So hopefully in the future that's something we can evolve and grow as well. So the final thing that we're going to talk about very quickly is this idea of a new platform, new startup that I'm involved in. It's called EdioFi. And EdioFi we built, it's a social community platform for doctors, nurses, health professionals in general, because we think that everybody has something to teach, and we think that the greatest mentor you can have is effectively everybody. And so what we want to try and do is create an open platform, like a social media platform, that connects doctors and nurses all over the world. And so anytime you see something or see something interesting, you can put it up. Now, there's similarities to things like Figure One that's out there already, but it's more of a medical Instagram. What we're doing is basically having a focus on education. And the bottom line is it's going to be free to the community because we want everybody to get on and learn. And so what we did is we looked at all of the social media platforms that are out there, and we distilled it into EdioFi. And so hopefully, what we're trying to create is this idea of this community of education for health professionals. And so we've had nurses and physios and pharmacists and everybody on board because they all give a different perspective. And a lot of people here have had different degrees. I was talking to Dean earlier on, and he was telling me that his first degree was pharmacy. Well, there's a lot of knowledge there that'll be lost if we don't find a way to share it. So basically the platform is built, and the people at this conference are the first people to see it. And we're going through, we're loading lots of content on. And because we want to encourage you to interact with us and to give it a go, we're offering the people that teach most and learn most on the platform in the next month, we're giving some iPhones away. Well, iPhones and smartphones, whatever you want. Because we want to look at ways to encourage you to help us grow this platform and basically make it for yourselves, because hopefully it's something that you're going to be using for a long time. So I suppose to finish up, the question is, why risk failure? And I think more than anything else, we need to develop our why to actually understand why we do what we do. We need to take massive risks if that's what we feel is the only way to get us there. But we can also mitigate those risks as we go. And as for failure in medicine, we worry about failure all the time. But the thing is, most of the time it's only an impact on our ego. And so the more we put ourselves out there, the more risks that we take, and the more failure we embrace, the better things will be. One thing I'd leave you with is Big Al. He said, failure is success and progress. And I suppose if we start to change the mindset, start to change why we think, or what we think about failure, I think that we can actually find a bit more fulfilling role for ourselves in medicine. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
And just while we're waiting, I had some of my own questions listening to that talk. It was really interesting. So I guess you've kind of explored this alternative pathway with your medical degree. So for someone, say, who's in a similar position and interested in doing something different, what would you recommend as your first steps?
Sure. It really comes down to what business you want to build and grow. The interesting thing now is, as I say, technology in the startup game is everywhere, even in Perth, which was traditionally all about traditional business and mining. Once that the mining died down over here, investors and people with a bit of money who wanted to encourage the startup world started looking at technology and what we could do in it. And the interesting thing is, from a medical startup point of view, there aren't many medical startups within Australia, especially at your level. But there are people who are willing to back you on that. And so, from a technology point of view, there's lots of things like Startup Week. There's something called, I believe it's Fucked Up, which is all about all the times that entrepreneurs messed up along the way, and you get an awful lot of experience to find out how other people made mistakes. And so I would say the first thing is, if it's technology, which is something that I'm involved in, heading along the startup weekend, just going with, if you have an idea, they'll put you in touch with developers, creative people, designers, and in a startup weekend you might spend 48 hours putting together an idea, and you might end up with a business or an idea at the end of it all. It's a great experience. It doesn't take much of your time, and as I say, if you have an idea, to actually see it come together in 48 hours is very exciting. So there's especially in major capital cities, things like Startup Weekend are probably a first good start for technology.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Good.
Anyone in the crowd got questions?
So, okay, cool.
Did he just give you a box?
Yeah, it's this weird soft microphone box thing.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's probably similar to that question, but I was wondering do you believe there's much of a role for a formalized business education? Would you advocate for someone to go to an MBA or grad certain business if they're interested in that, or should they go out and try and learn by osmosis?
I think there's a place for both. It depends what you want to go into. If you wanted to get into a more commercial field, so if you wanted to go into, say, be part of a corporate like Bupa and be on the executive board, they would like you to have an MBA. And they would like you to have a more structured business approach. However, they will support you in that, because it's not the same as what we do in medicine. If you went to some of their executive programs, as a doctor, they're actively calling out for doctors to be part of their health teams. So what you find is once you've applied, you're in the door, they will pay for your MBA and support you through it. The corporate world is much more supportive than medicine is to help you try and get where you want to go. In terms of being an entrepreneur, if you think that actually you love the thought of building your own stuff, I don't think it's very easy to teach that. There are online entrepreneur degrees. University of Canberra does a really good one. And as I say, with the college that we're putting together, we're looking at both partnering with universities to give you an MBA education as part of your fellowship, but also looking at with the entrepreneur degrees, they let you build your project with it, so it's not as formalized and as structured. It actually gives you a lot of scope to say, I'm working on a business, or I'm working on an idea, this is how I turn it into a business, and support you through that. Finally, there's organizations like EO, which is a worldwide entrepreneur organization. And they come together, groups of people, and they have an accelerator program. And so you can go along when you just have a thought or an idea for a business, and you're around people who will help and support you. Because as I say, it's challenging. There aren't many people in medicine that can give you that help and support. But that would be my thought.
Awesome. Anyone else with questions?
Hi. I guess my question is in regards to the why risk failure thing. Is there a points, do you reckon, where the failure outweighs the risk in terms of you'll actually say no to it, doing something because the failure could be so great? And how do you know as to when that point actually is?
So my challenge has always been the financial failure for most entrepreneurial ventures that I've ever had, being for coffees that we put together. It was a failure from a point of view of a lot of money, and so depending on what stage you're at, you have to weigh that up, and especially if it's financial. Well, then the question is, if you have a house and a mortgage and a family to look after, maybe something that requires you to put a lot of money into, and the potential of a return isn't the best way forward, because there are other ways of starting businesses with very little money. I suppose the other thing that I would be concerned about, especially in our profession, where our profession is quite conservative, is anything that you thought for a moment would risk your medical degree, because they can take it away from you as easy or much easier than how you got it. The interesting thing is, I don't know if anybody knows Health Engine. It's basically an online directory for doctors, and recently the doctor who runs that is a guy called Marcus Tan, and Health Engine is a great success story. It started by a couple of emergency doctors in WA, and it's built up to a multi-million-dollar business. I think the value must be 125 million now from nothing a couple of years ago. The challenge with that is that any time Health Engine as a business does something that may be perceived as unethical, the first thing they do is they talk about Marcus and his medical degree. And so they will if you're a doctor and in business, it opens you up more to criticism from a point of view of you can't always control every little bit thing that goes on in your business. And any time something goes wrong or the public are outraged, because public are outraged nowadays about everything, the problem is that they will go after you and go after your medical degree. So it's difficult, it is, because the medical degree opens doors, but it also can be quite restrictive, whereas other people would just have a go because they have nothing to lose. Once you have a DR, you have something significant to lose, right?
Gosh, this is an unusual little square thing. I love free education, and I saw you with the edify.com. How do I sign up? What do I do?
Oh yeah, I should have told you that as well.
I'm his wife, by the way, everybody, hi. He forgot to say it, so I'm reminding him.
No, for the free education, so Edify is, as I said, it's a social platform. It's live from today. It's edify.com. And basically to sign up, it's a 2-second name and our email address and password. We've got lots of images and videos and things on there already and we'll continue to add things going forward. But basically it's your platform, it's whatever you want to add to it and how you want to teach. I mean, effectively what we want to do is there are people in here who will love to teach and be very good at it, and we want to make you rock stars. So give it a go.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Chris. So much to learn from your talk today, and yeah, hope you all enjoyed it. And yeah, thank Dr. Chris again for his time.
Thank you very much.
Got a little present for you as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you all for coming. Cheers.